Good evening, it's good to be with you. A reading from Psalm 16. Protect me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the holy ones in the land, they are the noble in whom is all my delight. Those who choose another God multiply their sorrows. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out or take their names upon my lips. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I keep the Lord always before me. Because God is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad and my soul rejoices. My body also rests secure. You show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Here ends the reading. I'd like to share words of Kathleen Norris from her book, Amazing Grace, A Vocabulary of Faith. And she talks about inheritance. The title of this portion is Inheritance, Blessing, and Curse. Kathleen Norris's words. Human inheritance is both blessing and curse, and in religious inheritance, this paradox is acute. For many of us, religion is a heavy baggage. Stories of love and fear, liberation and constriction, grace and malice come not only from our own experiences and our family's past, but from ancestral history within a tradition. What curses do we need to shed in the process of growing up? What can we hold to as blessing? My inheritance, my story, is of a Protestant Christianity, Methodist, Congregational, and Presbyterian, whose roots lie deep in Judaism. In recent years, the Benedictine monastery tradition has given me an expanded sense of my Christian roots. To me, these monastics represent my deep heritage. The ancients, my ammas and abbas in the faith, who reflect a time when Christianity was neither Roman, nor Orthodox, nor Protestant, but simply was and is. I find it a blessing now to be able to invoke the saints who have formed me. A beloved grandmother, say as well as St. Paul, St. Benedictine, St. Teresa of Lisieux. I'm blessed to be able to enjoy the worshiping assembly of any Christian church as including both those present and absent, both living and dead. When I come to the end of the Apostles' Creed, they are all there in the communion of saints. Those who have helped me be and those who have helped to bring me to this place of song and story, worship and praise. But it's far less pleasant. It can feel like a curse to include in my welcome the difficult ancestors, the abusers, the crooks, the religiously self-righteous who literally scared the bejesus out of me when I was little, or who murdered my spirit with words of condemnation. Abel is welcome in my family tree, but I just as soon leave Cain out. Yet God has given me both, reminding me that line in Psalm 16, welcome indeed the heritage that falls to me. It can be a tough one to live with. If, as Paul says, all things work together for good for those who love God in Romans, then in giving me a mixed inheritance, both blessing and curse, God expects me to make something of it, redeem the bad, and turn it into something good. And I must start with my roots, with where I have been placed in my family, my marriage, culture, and religious tradition. But the urge for denial is strong. And when something feels like a curse, when it doesn't correspond to who I'd like to be, it's tempting to try to toss it out. I might hire someone to channel my personal angels or purchase an Indian name from a company in California. I might look into my past lives and discover that I was, as some now claim to be, an Indian in a former life. The religious marketplace is full of spiritualities that can costume us in fancy dress. All or any of this may be therapeutic, but therapy is not the purpose of religion, nor is feeling so special that one is able to boast of a contact with a spiritual world that most people lack. Christians often speak of having a call to a particular form of ministry. But from the days of the earliest church, it has been brought to our attention that this was mostly a matter of pedestrian inheritance. When Paul, in his first letter to the members of the Church of Corinth, asked them to consider your own calling, he emphasizes that not many of you were wise by human standards, and not many were powerful, not many were of noble birth, declaring that it's for this very reason that God chose them, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. Paul makes it clear that if we take inordinate pride in the spiritual gifts we've been blessed with, the joke is on us. Like so many American children in the 1950s, I played cowboys and Indians. In my grandparents' house, the house I live in, are the early artifacts of television cowboys that spurred us on. A Matt Dillon U.S. Marshal pin that reads on the back, CBS 1959. A card from the savings bank containing Hopalong Cassidy's secret code. I have long suspected that our games always had more to do with dreams of riding on horseback through open spaces, free of parental interference, than with race or domination. And we have also to consider the timeliness of the childhood imagination. A few years ago, I walked past a group of kids playing in my neighborhood. A little girl pointed to one child who was dragging a big leafy tree branch behind him, roaring mightily. She explained to me, "We are playing cowboys and Indians, and Andy is the dinosaur." Play is an important part of human development, but some games are meant to be outgrown. We are fortunate as adults if we can trace what we hold sacred back to our childhoods, to our original vision, a phrase coined by the English writer Edward Robinson for the title of his thoughtful book on children's religious development. But in order to have an adult faith, most of us have to outgrow and unlearn much of what we were taught about religion. Growing up doesn't necessarily mean rejecting the religion of our ancestors, but it does entail sorting out the good from the bad in order to reclaim what has remained vile. It's a balancing act to recognize the blessings, even the ones that come well disguised in the form of difficult relatives who have given you false images of Jesus with which you must contend. And it means naming and exorcising the curses, not cursing the people themselves who may have left you stranded with a boogeyman god, but cleansing oneself of the damage that was done. The temptation to simply reject what we can't handle is always there, but it means becoming stuck in a perpetual adolescence, a perpetual seeking for something, anything that doesn't lead us back to where we came from. When I see teenagers out in public with their families, holding back, refusing to walk with mom and dad, ashamed to be seen as part of the family, I have to admit that I have acted that way myself at times with regard to my Christian inheritance. A hapless and mortally embarrassed adolescent lurked behind the sophisticated mask I wore in my 20s. Faith was something for little kids and grandmas, not me. I lived for years in a sublimely sophisticated place, the island of Manhattan, and the thought of crossing the door of any of the thousands of churches there did not occur to me. I suspect it's only because I so blindly and crazily embraced my inheritance, leaving the literary world in New York City for a small town, the house my mom grew up in, the church my grandmother belonged to for nearly 60 years, that I am now glad to identify myself as an ordinary Christian. One of those people who, to the astonishment of pollsters, still totter off to church on Sunday morning. It's been a lively journey, and I am the same person who departed so long ago, and not the same at all. Storytelling is the way I've sorted through all this and tried to make sense of it. I continue to be amazed at how long it takes for me to figure things out, how long to tell it. Other people's stories of religious inheritance have long attracted me, partly because I learn from them how individual experience can be made meaningful to others, so that it does not remain exclusively private or personal. When I think of recent books that have mattered to me, that have conveyed useful messages concerning inheritance and conversion, I think of Nancy Mayer's stunning Ordinary Time, which relates her conversion to both Catholicism and feminism. I think of Roberta Bondi's Memories of God, in which she speaks with great affection of her Baptist aunts, including one who entertained Sunday school children by reciting the names of all the books of the Old Testament in one breath. But she also unravels for her adult self exactly what was wrong with the revival-style theology that scared her as a child, which she sums up as, "Only believe that God loves you or he'll send you to hell forever." Bondi's book also contains the best contemporary reflection that I know of on the image of God the Father. As a feminist who is also a patristic scholar, Bondi realizes that she cannot simply excise the image from the Christian lexicon as some feminists try to do. Instead, she begins praying to the Father in her personal devotions, and to her astonishment finds that the practice leads her to a reconciliation with her own father, with whom she had always had a tense and difficult relationship. A book that epitomizes what it means to come to terms with religious inheritance as both blessing and curse is Phil Jackson's Sacred Hoops. He's best known, of course, as the coach of the basketball team, the Chicago Bulls. But when a friend gave me the book, she suggested that I find it interesting as a reflection on religion, and she was right. Jackson was raised in North Dakota by parents who were Pentecostal preachers, and his story is that of someone who realizes early on that he doesn't belong in his religious tradition, but must find another way. The best thing about the book, to me that is, I didn't understand most of the basketball stuff, is the loving way in which Jackson speaks of his parents and the respect he conveys for their faith while acknowledging that he felt placed in a religious tradition in which he was destined to feel displaced, as the gift of tongues never came to him. The pain is there. He tells of coming home from school one day to find his mother gone, which was so unusual as to put him in a panic. He assumed that what Pentecostals termed the rapture, the sudden appearance of Jesus to herald the end of the world, had occurred and that he had been left behind. The pain was real. But Jackson writes as a grown-up who has come to terms with it, so that love and not fear prevails. He began using meditation techniques as a high school athlete, which led him to a serious study of Buddhism. Now, it seems, his Buddhist practice has led him to a new understanding and appreciation of his Christian inheritance. I doubt that Jackson has often been compared to Emily Dickinson. I think she would rather enjoy it. But when I read his book, I was reminded of the painful experience at Holyoke Seminary when she first began to discern the extent of her difference from her friends. The worship there was part of what scholars now call the Great Revival, and often had highly emotional pitch. Girls were asked to stand or come forward as a sign that they declared themselves for Jesus. But at one such meeting, Emily Dickinson, age 16, was the only one left seated after the altar call. She sums up the experience in flinty remarks. "They thought it queer I didn't stand. I thought it a lie. I thought a lie would be queerer." Describing the experience to a friend, sadly I believe, but also the sharp critical eye, she vividly portrays the alienation that a sensitive, thoughtful person can feel during the enthusiastic worship of the Christian assembly. What a strange sanctification is this that brings Christ down and shows him and allows him to select his friends. Her exclusion from the fold of those who had converted to Christ was the first great exclusion of a life that would have many. In many ways, Dickinson epitomizes the range of blessings and curses that it is possible to have in one's religious inheritance. She also evinces what it might mean to take it all in and make something of it. Through her poetry, she becomes a Christian contemplative, meditating on the crucifixion as few poets have done. Even though the revivalist Christianity of 19th century Amherst was not large enough to contain her, and she stopped going to church in her 30s, the Bible did have room for her, and she explored it freely. It permeates every poem, every letter that she wrote. The word curse does not appear in Dickinson's poetry, but she often wrote of pain. In her poem, A Great Hope Fell, she writes, "A not admitting of the wound until it grew so wide that all my life had entered it, and there were troughs beside. A close of the simple lid that opened to the sun until the tender carpenter perpetual nail it down." Reading the poem, I think of a friend, a Benedictine monk, who in his early 30s began to recognize that he had been sexually abused by a priest as a teenager. Previously, he had adopted a typically adolescent form of denial and seen the experiences of evidence of his own precociousness and even sophistication. But in working with victims of sexual abuse, he began to understand what had happened to him and began to tell his story. First to a psychiatrist, then to his monastic community, and finally to other victims of abuse by priests. Over time, his dreadful pain over the irretrievable loss of innocence began to be converted into a blessing for other people. As someone who had been abused by a priest and had himself become a priest, he found that he had something important to say, both to victims and to priests who were seeking to understand and avoid the abuse of priestly authority. Converting a painful inheritance into something good requires all the discernment we can muster, both from what is within us and what we can glean from mentors. The worst of the curses that people inflict on us, the real abuse and terror, cannot be forgotten or undone, but they can be put to good use in the new life that one has taken up. It's a kind of death. The lid closes on what went before, but the past is not denied. And we are still here with all of our talents, gifts, and failings, our strengths and weaknesses. All the baggage comes along, nothing wasted, nothing lost. Perhaps the greatest blessing that religious inheritance can bestow is an open mind, one that can listen without judging. It is rare enough that we recognize it in another when we encounter it. I often see it in people who have attained what the monastic tradition terms detachment, an ability to live at peace with the reality of whatever happens. Such people do not have a closed-off air, nor a boastful demeanor. In them, it is clear their wounds have opened the way to compassion for others, and compassion is the strength and soul of a religion. I'd like to close with a prayer by Ariane Lean. This one's entitled, "When I Need God to Redeem This Painful, Hard, Sad Thing." Let us pray. Wonder worker, when I peered up from the hole and saw no way out, when what was taken away gave no warning, when I didn't think I had the courage or even the energy to live into a life looking nothing like it did before, something was happening. The thing I thought would break me, that did break me, was now making me. Great is the mystery of faith. The pieces of life's puzzle come together here and there, or shockingly in a big patch at once, and I see you, active and good in all things. Your power to redeem, to take the most painful deaths and birth from them living, breathing gifts, taking my own breath away in awe. You did not create pain for me to grow or cause the heartache of my soul, but you are the expert shaper of life's ashes. Somehow this terrible thing, when given in earnest to you today and many tomorrows from now, becomes an open channel where something amazing will flow. a passage echoing with a tender voice, you can trust me with all things, in all things. You will lift me from this hole. I will wail and wonder with gratitude. I'll begin a new kind of dance, letting my limp remind my soul and world how broken bodies learn exquisite new rhythms. With you, pain finds a home in something larger than itself, and sacred scars hold haven over wounds that will someday bless. Amen.